The chandelier above the long mahogany table glittered like a constellation, casting fragments of light across the polished floor. The air in the conference room was heavy with importance, the kind that made people sit straighter, speak softer, breathe slower. Dozens of delegates, investors, and government officials filled the seats, each one dressed in tailored confidence. At the head of the table sat Sheikh Rashid al-Karim, a man whose wealth was whispered about and whose influence was feared. His white robes were immaculate, his keffiyeh perfectly arranged. Yet, despite his calm presence, there was tension in his eyes, the kind that comes when too much depends on a single conversation. As the sheikh leaned forward and began to speak in rich, flowing Arabic, the room collectively leaned closer. His words carried the rhythm of authority and grace, but within seconds, confusion began to spread like a quiet wave. The interpreters in their booths exchanged worried glances, fingers trembling over their microphones. The system crackled, hissed, and then silence. A faint buzz of static filled the air, swallowing every attempt to translate. The delegates fidgeted. Someone coughed. Another whispered urgently into a headset that no longer worked. The sheikh's brow furrowed. He spoke again, slower this time, his tone patient but firm, as if testing whether anyone truly understood him. No one responded. The chief organizer, pale with embarrassment, stood and stammered something about technical difficulties. Sweat glistened on his forehead. Every second of misunderstanding was an insult, an unspoken failure before one of the most powerful men in the world. At the back of the room, near the service door, a young woman in a simple gray uniform watched silently, clutching a mop. Her name tag read Lena. She had been wiping the marble floor before the meeting began, careful to stay unseen, to blend into the background as always. But now she couldn't look away. The sheikh's words were not just words to her. They carried warmth, nostalgia, the familiar melody of home. Each phrase pulled her back to dusty streets, to her father's voice reading poetry in the same language. Her heart pounded as the silence in the room deepened. The sheikh's expression darkened. His patience was fading. And suddenly, before she could stop herself, Lena whispered the translation aloud. Barely audible at first, just a breath. But the words carried. Heads turned sharply. Conversations halted mid-sentence. She froze, terrified. But the sheikh's eyes met hers. Steady, piercing, curious. "Continue," he said in Arabic. And for the first time since she'd arrived in this country, she didn't hide her voice. The silence that followed her voice felt unreal, like the air had thickened. All eyes were locked on the woman in the gray janitor's uniform. Lena's hand still clutched the mop handle, knuckles white, her lips parted as if she couldn't believe what she had just done. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor she'd just polished. But the sheikh's gaze, sharp, unblinking, held her there. "Come closer," he said softly in Arabic, his tone calm but commanding. The interpreter's booth was still dead silent, their machines blinking uselessly. The organizers glanced at one another, unsure whether to allow it. But the sheikh gestured toward Lena again, and no one dared to argue. Slowly, she walked forward, her shoes squeaking faintly against the floor, every step echoing in the stillness. She reached the end of the table, eyes lowered, unable to meet the rows of astonished faces staring at her. The sheikh's expression softened just slightly. "You understand me," he said again, this time not as a question but a quiet marvel. She nodded. He turned back to the group and continued speaking. Long, intricate sentences full of metaphors, idioms, and diplomatic nuance. And she followed, translating seamlessly, her voice steadying with each word. Her Arabic carried a tenderness that no interpreter's device could replicate. She didn't just translate. She conveyed tone, emotion, respect. The listeners were entranced, watching as she shifted from servant to scholar before their eyes. The sheikh began to speak more freely, his eyes occasionally flicking toward her in approval. He mentioned trade routes, shared cultural initiatives, a vision of collaboration rooted in understanding. And Lena gave each word a life of its own. At one point, an executive interrupted, asking her to simplify a phrase. Lena hesitated, unsure if she should comply. The Sheikh lifted his hand gently, silencing the man. "Do not interrupt her," he said in English, his accent thick but his meaning clear. "She understands perfectly." A murmur swept through the room. The atmosphere shifted. Where there had been discomfort and embarrassment, now there was something else. Awe. It was as if everyone had just realized they were witnessing something rare and quietly profound. Lena, the invisible cleaner they'd all walked past without a glance, now commanded the room without even trying. When she finished the last of his sentences, her voice faltered only slightly. The Sheikh smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Finally," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "Someone who truly listens." The words seemed to linger in the air long after he stopped speaking. Lena lowered her eyes again, her heart trembling with confusion and disbelief. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a cleaner, not as a shadow in the corner, but as someone who belonged to the conversation. The meeting concluded in a swell of applause and murmurs, though no one seemed to know exactly whom they were applauding for. The Sheikh, or the janitor who had just saved the day. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped, and the once tense room now buzzed with energy. Executives in suits rushed forward to shake the Sheikh's hand, trying to repair their earlier humiliation. But his attention was elsewhere. His gaze followed Lena as she quietly slipped toward the door, her mop still waiting in the corner where she had left it. "Miss," his voice called gently across the room. It carried enough authority that everyone fell silent again. Lena froze mid-step, her heart leaping into her throat. Slowly, she turned. The Sheikh was already walking toward her, his white robes flowing, every step measured and sure. The crowd parted for him instinctively, as though the air itself made way. When he stopped before her, he didn't speak immediately. He studied her face, the traces of exhaustion, the humility, and the quiet strength that years of struggle had carved into her eyes. "You were not on the list of translators," he said finally. His tone was calm, curious, almost kind. "How did you learn my language so well?" Lena hesitated. She looked down, twisting her hands together. "I used to live in your country," she said softly. "My father worked as a teacher in Sharjah. He taught me Arabic since I was a little girl. But when the war came, we lost everything. We came here, and I've been cleaning offices ever since." Her voice cracked on the last words, shame and grief flickering through. For a long moment, the Sheikh said nothing. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Then his expression shifted. Something deep and solemn passed through his eyes. He turned to his assistant, who had hurried up behind him, still clutching a tablet. "Take her name," the Sheikh said quietly but firmly. "She will not be cleaning floors anymore. From now on, she will work as a translator under my office." Gasps rippled across the room. The executives exchanged bewildered glances, some murmuring objections that died on their lips under the Sheikh's steady gaze. Lena's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Sir, I don't know if I'm qualified," she whispered. The Sheikh's eyes softened. "You spoke truthfully. That is qualification enough." Tears welled in her eyes as she bowed her head, unable to stop a trembling smile. Around her, the same people who had ignored her for years now watched with quiet respect, some even envy. The Sheikh inclined his head slightly in farewell, then turned and strode out, his entourage following like a tide. Lena remained standing in the doorway, still gripping her cleaning rag, her mind spinning. It felt unreal, as if she had stepped from one life into another in the space of an afternoon. Outside the tall glass windows, the sun was setting, flooding the room with amber light. For the first time in years, the world didn't feel so heavy. She took a deep breath, looked at her reflection in the glass, and whispered to herself, half in Arabic, half in hope, "Maybe this is my beginning."